Hello, everybody. Another podcast with datastorage.com where we're seeing that enterprise infrastructure is changing faster than it has in decades. Between cloud computing, AI workloads, and the rise of hybrid and multi-cloud architectures, companies are rethinking how they build and operate their systems. To talk about where things are going, I'm joined with someone who helped shape enterprise infrastructure from the very beginning. Russ Artzt is the co-founder of Computer Associates, one of the most influential software companies in enterprise history. Russ, welcome to datastorage.com.
Thank you, John. Nice introduction. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, Russ, you had a front row seat to the evolution of enterprise infrastructure from mainframes to distributed computing to the cloud.
Yeah.
When you look at today's infrastructure landscape, what feels fundamentally different compared to previous eras?
Well, very different. As I said, so I started years ago at Computer Associates. We later named ourselves CA Technology. Some people know it by that name. And in those days, it was all about the IBM mainframe, which was a centralized system. We had a mainframe at CA, and for 20 years, it never went down. It just kept running. It's an incredible machine. And when Charles Wang and I started the company, so he was the CEO, I was building products, and we had a blast. And what we focused on are, in this centralized mainframe system, what are the problems? What are the problems people are having? Where are the shortcomings, and how can we fill the shortcomings? And but mainframe was very, very centralized, which is interesting because it went from a centralized system to years later to a SaaS system, to cloud, and now AI. And there's both similarities to AI, as well as lots of new stuff, and I'll talk about that in a second, but
Yeah, it's funny you took my next question there in your
yeah,
answer, which was
yeah,
one of the things we're seeing is a shift from centralized infrastructure towards more distributed architectures
yeah,
again,
yes,
multi-cloud, hybrid cloud,
yep.
specialized providers. Does
hmm
that remind you of earlier cycles in computing?
it does, but nothing like this, nothing like what's going on in AI. I mean, yes, there's similarities across the board. You know, when we went, I'll tell you a big change we went through. When I was at CA, we became the second largest mainframe company next to IBM. And we did it with IT infrastructure. And then in the 1990s, I came in one day and there was this a journal that everybody read called Computer World. Monday morning, you read Computer World. And the headlines were the mainframe is dead, which of course never happened. But client server sunk in. And all of a sudden, we had a whole new technology, mostly based upon a system that Bell Labs created called Unix. And everyone created their own version of Unix. And from that, so there were 100 versions of Unix. And that's when my team decided we're going to build a new product called Unicenter that would do end-to-end management of all these different systems. If you remember in the old days, HP had a version of Unix called HPUX. There was Sun Solaris. There was Digital Unix. There was 100 of them. And Windows, of course, and OS2. So we managed all of it. And from there created an environment called SaaS, which was basically a multi-user system and really forced people to change the business model.
Yeah.
It was major. And do you want to get into that now? Or
Yeah,
should
I
we?
mean, speaking of SaaS, right? Over the last 15 years or 20 years, however many it be, hyperscalers like AWS, Google, and
Yeah,
Azure have enabled an incredible wave of startups that many of them are now major enterprises, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
many companies actually begin their journey with hundreds of thousands of dollars of free cloud credits from these guys and build entirely within that single ecosystem. From your perspective, like what role have hyperscalers played in accelerating innovation?
Oh, quite a bit. I mean, so when we went from, and I'll talk about SaaS in a minute, but when we went from SaaS, we had mainframe, then we had SaaS, then we had cloud, and cloud brought about the hyperscalers, the big guys, the Amazon AWS, the Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and there's obviously others, but those are the three big ones. They changed the world. All of a sudden, now you didn't have to, you almost didn't need your own data center anymore. You can just use the cloud for everything that you wanted to do. We used to in the 1990s, everybody worked on their Windows desktop, and
Yeah.
you had an application really consisted of a fat client. You had a lot of code running on your desktop, on your Windows machine, talking usually to a database server, and you had a database, on-prem though. If you had Oracle or SQL Server or any of these SQL databases, they were on-prem. They were in your data center. Amazon changed all that, and then Microsoft did and Google Cloud, So the hyperscalers changed the world quite a bit. But I'll talk about SaaS for a second, because I don't want to forget that thought. When CA decided, companies in the 90s all of a sudden said, you know what? We have to go to SaaS. This model is very important, and it's a user model. So all of a sudden, I know at CA, we charge by user and by consumption. So in other words, instead of on the mainframe, you sell a deal for $100,000, it would be a flat fee. You buy this application, it's running on the mainframe, everyone's sharing it. We didn't know how many users there were. We didn't care, and we got 100 grand for it. Here, we want to know how many users. So SaaS changed the model. So if you have 50 users, you're charging for 50 users every month, but you can only recognize the revenue as you consumed it. And it would add up over time. But all of a sudden, we went from a $6 billion company to a $4 billion company overnight because of the way we recognize revenue. Nothing changed. Same customers, same product line, but the way we recognize revenue changed, And analysts loved it because SaaS was very predictable. You knew you're charging by user. That's not going to change very much. You're going to add some users, but it's a very predictable model. So you could almost predict what a given company their earnings are going to be for a given quarter. It wasn't, as opposed to, on the mainframe. And even now, it's going to change because
Yeah, I wanted to get into that. Like,
yeah,
where
yeah,
do you see the next change? Because we're hearing, okay, it went from
yeah,
SaaS to
yeah,
cloud, right?
yeah,
Or it went from on-prem to SaaS to cloud, and now there's the AI consumption use case. So, like,
yes.
how do you see that
That's
changing
that's amazing. I mean, I've seen all these changes, and going to cloud and internet was big. This is bigger. This is bigger because AI is going to impact every industry. And it is. You could see it. And it can't stop. It just keeps going. A lot of people are critical of it. We're worried. My daughter is talking to an AI bot every night. It's scary. And yes, it does need some control. It needs some guidelines, but you can't stop technology. It's incredible. And what gives you the ability to do is amazing. All of a sudden, think about research. You know,
Yeah,
the whole way you do research now has changed. The way you learn things has changed. I know if I want to learn a new area, okay, I'll go on one of the popular large language models and I'll learn it, you know.
yeah,
And what happened was, we had the technology, we had machine learning years ago, but it was never fast enough. It never really worked well. Years ago, I used machine learning and I used neural network models, but I did it on CPUs that just weren't fast enough. So what's the trick now? Well, NVIDIA years ago created for the graphics industry, not for AI, but for graphics and for the whole video games era. NVIDIA created the best chips, and they built a whole software platform to manage those chips. Okay, and they have incredible stuff, and that's why that's why they're the leader in chip technology in the world. And you know that proved to be the basis of building new CPUs called GPUs. So a
Hmm.
GPU is nothing like a CPU. What I'm used to on a CPU no longer exists. I mean, when you go to a GPU. A CPU, everything's linear. Every instruction gets executed linear, one step at a time. On a GPU, it could be hundreds of instructions running in parallel, all parallel processing. So it's phenomenal, you know. And you can't run these large language models, are so compute heavy. You can't run them unless you have a GPU. It
Yeah.
could be NVIDIA, it could be AMD, it could be any number of companies, but you've got to have GPUs. So that's kind of changed the world. Why? Because now everyone's figuring out, okay, I need GPUs. How do I do it? I've got to build a new data center. That's tough. Okay, that could be tough. And so alternatives come in. And one of the alternatives are these neo cloud providers. The hyperscalers are out there, but they've been mostly CPU oriented. The neo clouds came in and said, you know what? We have an opportunity here to do something really unique. We're not going to replace Amazon. We can't do everything AWS does. We can't do everything Google Cloud does, but we can be very specialized and do a really good job with GPUs. So they came in and they focused on GPUs, and they focused on AI, and they focused on AI agents, and they focused on large language models, and they do a good job of it. And they give you the alternative to not having to build your own data center. I could go to a neo cloud like a CoreWeave or a Nebius Group or a Vulture. I could go to them and they'll do all the work for us.
Yeah.
They'll set up the GPUs. Because think about it, there's expertise there in knowing how to build a data center. The data center. Now you got GPUs, you have networking with the GPUs, you have storage devices. How do you configure them? Everything's got to get configured. You have software that configures them, which is complicated. So the world has changed.
Yeah. It's funny. We speak to hundreds and in some months thousands of cloud infrastructure
Yeah,
experts
yeah,
or, engineers, machine learning engineers. It's crazy that the amount of people we talk to, the low percentage of these people that even know that NeoCloud exists.
right, right.
Like, what is a NeoCloud,
That
right?
is a
Like,
neo cloud. Exactly. Yeah,
yeah, the way I see it is, a lot of us early on when we're starting up a software company, we grab a hold of an S3 bucket, we build on AWS, we've got our free credits, then we start scaling and we get what we want. We get a lot of customers,
yeah.
they start pounding on the software, and all of a sudden you find where there's performance issues
Hmm.
or there's heavy cost burden,
Hmm.
and it's like, oh, well, maybe I need to use this CDN over there, or maybe I should move this workload that's doing all my heavy video intensive processing over here. And
Right.
then I look at it, it's like, well, my data's an S3, and every time I move it anywhere, I end up paying the
Yeah.
regulatory tax of egress.
The
And
egress tax.
so
Yeah.
want to get your opinion on like where in this world, we're not all of us are going to use the AWS, GCP, Azure,
Right.
Oracle,
Right.
hyperscale, but where in your mind is there an opportunity to to find use cases for this alternative storage layer and
Yeah.
this like alternative compute GPU layer?
John, I think it's a huge opportunity. I think that neo clouds are coming in at a good time. Let's face it, Amazon and the rest are powerful, but they're very expensive. And if you use their storage facility, you use Amazon's S3, it's expensive. There's a huge opportunity now for the neo clouds, also for the storage providers, for the Backblazes of the world. I happen to know Backblaze. Backblaze has a very powerful, what's called B2 system that's very high performance. And they just announced a NeoCloud offering. And I think it's important because think about it, in this new world of GPUs and CPUs, you want fast storage. And when you're building a model, think about it. Your first time you set up your model, then you do training. Well, incrementally, after you do some training, you want that model saved somewhere. So you want to move it. You want to move it to a storage facility. Backblaze is a perfect storage facility to store that data. And you know what? You then need to move the data back, okay, back into the Neo cloud so it can do some more training. So every time it does more training and updates the model, it's got to send it down to Backblaze, and Backblaze eventually will modify it and then send it back, to the Neo cloud. And what I liked about Backblaze is they don't charge for the egress. When they send it out, they don't charge. When they
Yeah.
bring it in, they charge, and it's fast. And
Yeah,
it's
I heard it's like a terabyte a
a
second
terabyte a second. Yeah, it's
throughput.
so it fits into the whole GPU Neo Cloud model,
Yeah.
um, and it's designed to support S3. So if a Neo Cloud is using S3 as a standard, they don't have to use Amazon anymore. They can use an S3 compatible storage system like a Backblaze. So that's what's going on there. I think it's exciting, and I think storage is going to become the anchor, to what goes on, in the AI ecosystem. And think about it. If the storage system is smart enough to have metadata, then you could start using it as a database and you could start issuing
Absolutely.
queries against it. So now the data that's stored there, the model data or whatever customer data might be there, now you can query it in a very intelligent way, so it becomes much more powerful and easy to access and easy to get benefits from. So there's some great stuff going on with storage and the AI ecosystem. Very exciting area, big opportunity.
Yeah. When you look at alternative storage providers like a Backblaze,
Yeah.
what type of cost savings are you actually looking at compared to a hyperscaler?
Oh, I think, first of all, there's no egress fee.
Yeah.
Okay, that saves you a lot of money.
Yeah. So if you're dealing in petabytes of data, then you're no brainer right there.
It's a
Just
no-brainer.
in anywhere.
Dealing with petabytes, and if you don't get charged for egress, that's half the battle, so you could be saving 50, 60, 70, 80%, versus using a hyperscaler. So it makes sense. It just makes sense. And some of these neo clouds have their own storage facility, so that a Backblaze or one of the other third-party storage facilities are going to have to adapt and figure out how they're going to complement. Maybe they don't replace a CoreWeave storage facility. Maybe they complement what CoreWeave has, because a
Yeah.
Backblaze has very important and broad device support, not just flash, but supports the old HDD spinning disks, which is important. Yeah.
Yeah. Getting back to we're kind of touching on multi-cloud because we're talking about
Yeah.
using alternative, compute and GPU providers, but multi or hybrid cloud is a much bigger conversation than that, right? It's not just where you're running your compute. So for many organizations today, the conversation isn't should we go multi-cloud? It's how do we do it without creating complexity or security risk? What advice would you give to companies that want to adopt multi-cloud or hybrid architectures without over-engineering their infrastructure?
Great question. I would look at what the hyperscalers are providing, look at what the neo clouds are providing, and I would go in that direction, because to build my own data center, most companies don't have the wherewithal, to do it and the expertise to do it. There are a number of AI people who do know how to do it, and they're going to make a lot of money because they're going to be in demand, in big time in demand. And I'll talk in a second about the opportunity for software developers moving forward. I do think that, one of the biggest things that's going to go on in the next decade are augmenting and building new data centers. What I would do personally, I would look seriously at if I needed multi-cloud, I would go a combination of one of the big three hyperscalers and one of the big neo cloud providers.
Yeah.
Think about it. I may have a very important application that's based on AI agents, based on large language model. Any new Gen AI application is going to use a large language model, right? It's going to have a chat interface and it's going to be agentic. It's going to be AI. agentic based, right? That has to run on GPUs. There's nothing else that can support it. So you need GPUs. Are you going to go figure out where to put your GPUs? No. I would go to a neo cloud because they specialize in GPUs.
Yeah.
Unlike, that's what they specialize in. And then if I also, in addition, have a multi-cloud need requirement because I have typical CPU transactions running with Amazon or Google or Microsoft, you know, then I would set it up with hyperscalers and neocloud combined. Just before I forget this thought, one of the things we did when CA switched from mainframe to SaaS, okay, the way we built our product, we built a new product called Unicenter. We built it internally, and we did not go out. We hired a few Unix specialists out in the field. 90% of the people that built Unicenter were people who were at CA and we felt we had a philosophy. Let's give the opportunity to our own people first.
Hmm.
With some superstar developers. If they're good on mainframe, why can't they be good on Windows and on Unix? So we had that philosophy of giving the opportunity. And I would look at that as well. You may need to hire some outside AI people if they're really exceptional, but really you can take your good people and give them the opportunity to learn AI and help you grow with AI because you're going to need AI experts, even though you may need fewer programmers because of vibe coding and all the great new development tools that are available now, but you're still going to need AI experts to design how is your data center going to look? How's my network going to look? You still need systems engineers, and I think some of the best people who can help with that of the old Unix systems engineers, because a lot of Unix applies when you get into the development tools that are out there from Cursor and those kind of new AI development tools. So there's a huge opportunity, and I would really look to give my own people an opportunity first.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. I think finding good Unix developers, how it translates into this
Yeah,
newer world is great advice. And getting into some of your other past work, right? I know that you've done a lot of work around data quality, and we
yeah,
call it like master data management. Where do you feel like data fits into
yeah.
this
It's
movement?
huge. It's huge. It's really, think about it. It is all about data, and now, John, you and I had a lot of productive years at Ringlead in the whole CRM space, data space. And data is more important now than ever because now you need data to feed the models.
Yeah.
You're dealing with knowledge bases now that large language models process, but they have the ability to bring in the data from whatever different source. It could be from a CRM, it could be from a marketing system, it could be a customer database, it could be, any number of things. So data becomes critical. And the reason it's so critical is that the models that you're building are based on data, and that data's got to be stored. That data ultimately has got to be queried. You want to have some intelligent analysis of that data. So the tools that are available now with AI. I mean, think about it. Now, if I look at it and I look at a CRM, how long would it take to do a basic CRM using AI agentic coding and vibe coding? Companies are doing it. They're doing
Yeah.
it right now. They're doing it right now. So there's huge opportunities to really take advantage of these tools. And I think
Yeah.
people will,
Yeah, no, I see a world, and I like to promote the idea of, um, you know, data. If you think about data, most people, you start getting technical and their eyes glaze over. But if you simplify it to what people in general know, everybody knows how banks work, right?
yeah,
And so I like to talk about data as if we're creating a data bank for our organization. And there are ways you can make deposits, like you deposit sales data into your systems and marketing data, and
exactly.
every time you clean your data, you're depositing, and then you're collecting data from customers. And like, think of companies that have been running the same shipping logistics routes for the last 30 years, and they have more data on those routes than
Yeah,
any other business. They don't know if they, they've been making deposits into their data bank. And so one of the theories I have is that companies are going to start realizing that the data that they're collecting in their bank is potentially their most valuable asset as we make it into the next 3 to 5 years. Because just like banks, once you have a high enough balance, you can start to lend that balance out
Yeah,
to others,
yeah.
right? And what I think of is like, think of that logistics use case where I could now potentially go license that data to Tesla and Rivian and companies that are building self-driving vehicles. And that data can become very valuable in other ways that we're not even
It,
monetizing it today.
yeah, and it's the way these models work today. If you look at Tesla, I drive a Tesla, right? I drive it every day, and I've been driving it for years. Realize, I mean, the self-driving is phenomenal. I mean, at first you're a little nervous with it, but then once you get used to it, you don't need to drive anymore. It
Yeah,
does a better job. At night, sees better than I do. In the rain, it sees much better than I do. And it's all fed on real-time, real data. It's
yeah,
all data. It's not algorithm. It's all data. They take real-time driving situations and keep feeding new data into the model, and the model feeds the autonomous driving.
very
Phenomenal.
cool.
And that's what's going on in that's why every industry is going to be changed. And what's also exciting, John, is what's ahead. Yeah, I mentioned data centers. We're going to build new data centers. They're going to have chips from NVIDIA, from AMD. They're going to have infrastructure. They're going to have apps, etc. But how about what AI is doing in the physical world? What's going on? What's going to happen
Oh,
with robots?
I
What's
can't
going to
wait.
happen when robots are cheap enough where an average household can afford to bring in a robot into their house to do, yeah, manual chores like vacuuming and
Yeah,
cutting the lawn and
do a
all that,
gourmet dinner.
but maybe cooking a dinner. Yeah, coming up with a recipe out of an AI knowledge base.
I want my hair cut once a week.
Yeah, cut your hair. I mean, think about it. The world is changing. We have to be ready. We
Yeah,
really have to be ready because you can't stop it. You really need to embrace it, and that's what's happening. I'm telling you, in 10 years, everyone's gonna have a robot. Everyone will be able to afford it.
yeah.
You
So
know,
you seem excited about this transition.
it's incredible. I
I
think,
agree.
and I think that one of the things we forget about is that to enable all this, we need energy. We need electricity. We need power. And that's where, if I look at it in the world on a world scale, US is ahead. All right. Our chip makers, our chip designs, they're better than like an NVIDIA, they're better than anybody in the world, including China. Energy is where we need to catch up. We
Yeah,
need we need more plants, more power plants, because you know what? As big companies like Bank of America and Wells Fargo, they're going to build huge data centers with huge amounts of GPUs. You need power. So that's going to be the next thing that's going to be a bit of a challenge because
yeah,
we don't have
absolutely.
enough today. Yeah,
A challenge both, in terms of priority and investment, but also,
yeah,
ethics and how environmental
yes,
impact. Like it
yeah,
becomes such a big conversation.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah. That actually brings up the next decade of infrastructure is kind of what I want to touch on next, which
Yeah.
is if you are advising a startup founder or a CTO who's building the next generation of AI or data platforms, how should they think about designing infrastructure that will still work 5 or 10 years from now?
I would 100% go with the AI agentic interfaces. I would study them. I would be My developers would be using these new vibe code platforms, and there's some good ones out there. Okay, I know a startup, for example, AnyQuest that's real good at it. You know, but obviously Claude is fantastic. A lot of great tools out there. I would be designing new agents, AI agents. I would look at my code if I had a bunch of SaaS code. I would look, I might do it in transition. I might, if you look at what Google did, they kind of did it in transition. If you use Gmail, You still have Gmail on the left and you can have Gemini on the right part of your screen. You know, ultimately, you're not going to see the old Gmail. You're going to see an agentic Gmail. You know, it's going to change over time. So that's what I would be looking at the new designs. I'd be looking at the new development tools that are out there, like from Claude. You know, I would be looking at tools. I work with another startup called Sky Portal that's very good at managing your modeling tools, you know, so it can look at your PyTorch and it can look at your ML flow and tell you if it's configured right. And if the models need to be debugged, it can help you debug it. You know, it can help you monitor what's going on and fix it and say with a chat interface, oh, you know, your PyTorch isn't set up right. Change this config. No, we'll do it for you. Boom. And it just does it.
Wow.
You know, so it's very powerful. You know, there's exciting stuff going on. I would be embracing these new tools. I would have my people learn these new tools. You know, I would have some of my developers look to go more into AI design and AI operations. You know, we don't need as many coders anymore, but we do need AI experts. We do need people to help us design our apps, design our data centers, you know, and that's going to go on for the next decade, you know.
That's a wonderful advice, and I think a great way to close out the session here today.
Yeah.
So, Russ just gave us some amazing insights on the development side where we should be focusing, and then on my side, it's always about the data with me. It's like every
You
company,
always the data.
yeah, like every company, if you're not
Yeah.
really thinking about how you're banking data today and
Well,
how you're bringing together information across every part of your business into a place where it is centralized and it has access
yeah.
controls and security, and you can invoke all of this amazing AI against different segments of your own
And
first
what we
party
can do with the
intelligence,
data
right?
now, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Yeah. John and I go back to the Ringlead days where we took a startup company, Ringlead, and it became a successful software company that then got sold to ZoomInfo. Um, And you know what? You know what's interesting, John? I was talking to someone at ZoomInfo. They're taking the Ringlead technology and making them AI agents.
Amazing.
So it's a good feeling knowing what we built is still being used in a valuable way.
Absolutely.
Anyway, this was
Absolutely.
great, John. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely. It's amazing to sit down with you, Russ, and always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, John.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.